In life, we are taught to speak, to express, to share, to convince, but very few are taught the power of silence. There comes a moment on the path of self-cultivation where you no longer need validation, applause, or agreement. There is a kind of knowledge that, once understood, must be protected, not because others cannot hear it, but because they are not ready to carry its weight. Today, I want to share with you a truth, a secret, not the kind you shout into the world, but the kind that transforms you in silence. This is not about ego, this is about mastery. The moment you learn this secret, your journey shifts. But the next step is not to speak, it is to listen to the world, to your thoughts, to the inner stillness that follows real understanding. So if you've come here searching for something external, recognition, power, admiration, you are still facing outward. But if you are ready to face inward, to walk the more difficult path of restraint, discipline, and inner clarity, then keep listening. Because not all truths are meant to be shared. Some are meant to be lived in silence. In today's world, speech has become a constant stream, an endless flow of opinions, judgments, and expressions that often serve more to fill the silence than to convey true understanding. But the deeper you go on the path of personal development and inner mastery, the more you realize that wisdom does not always announce itself. It does not need to be loud. In fact, true wisdom is often silent. It is not concerned with recognition or applause. It simply exists, calm and steady, like a still lake untouched by wind. This silence is not emptiness, it is presence, it is awareness. It is the deliberate choice to speak only when speech carries weight, and to remain silent when words would only dilute the essence of truth. To speak less and observe more is not to become passive. It is to become precise. It is to recognize that every word has energy, every thought a consequence, and every reaction a cost. People who constantly talk are often reacting, not reflecting. They are driven by the need to be heard, to be seen, to validate their existence through the attention of others. But when a person begins to understand themselves deeply, that need falls away. The value of observation rises. They start to see how the world works not through words, but through action, patterns, and unspoken truths. Observation reveals what speech often hides. You see the intentions behind behavior. You see the insecurities behind aggression. You see the truth that people try to cover with noise. And in that seeing, you grow. When you speak less, your mind becomes sharper. You begin to hear things others miss. The tone behind someone's words, the hesitation in their voice, the contradiction between what they say and what they do. Your silence becomes your strength. It allows you to gather information, to study the dynamics around you, and to prepare your response instead of reacting impulsively. Silence becomes your strategy. It allows you to remain grounded, to conserve your energy, and to speak with purpose rather than from habit. This is not about being emotionless, it is about being composed. Not every situation requires your opinion. Not every argument needs your defense. Not every moment is meant to be filled. There is also something sacred about silence. When you carry inner knowledge, whether from experience, insight, or deep learning, that knowledge begins to shape your character. You no longer feel the urgency to share it with the world. You recognize that knowledge without application is noise, and that most people do not truly seek truth, only comfort. So you stay quiet, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. You speak when it adds value. You stay silent when it protects peace. And in doing so, you rise above the chaos that consumes those who talk endlessly without listening. To observe more is also to cultivate humility. You begin to see how much you do not know. You start to notice the layers behind every situation. You realize that the world is not black and white, and that understanding takes time. This keeps you grounded. It reminds you that wisdom is not about always being right. It is about being in alignment with yourself, with the moment, with what is truly needed. Sometimes, what is needed is not another voice. It is presence, a calm presence that holds space for growth, for truth to emerge, for clarity to settle. Speaking less also deepens your relationship with yourself. In silence, you meet your thoughts. You begin to separate your voice from the noise of the world. You start to notice your patterns, your impulses, your reactions, and in noticing them, you begin to transform them. You stop chasing approval. You stop performing for acceptance. You start living in alignment with what you know to be true quietly, powerfully, unshakably. The more you develop this inner clarity, the less you need to announce it. You become like a mountain unmoved by winds, undisturbed by storms, yet full of life and depth within. When you choose silence over unnecessary speech, you begin to communicate in other ways, through your energy, through your discipline, through the way you walk into a room. People feel it. They notice the calm in your presence. They sense the depth in your gaze. They recognize the restraint in your words. And without saying much, you begin to influence. Not through persuasion, but through example. Your silence becomes a mirror. It reflects what others are not yet ready to face, and for those who are ready, it becomes an invitation to go deeper, to listen more, to speak with intention, and to grow from within. There is a fundamental truth that many people overlook on their journey toward personal growth and wisdom. Not every truth is meant for every ear. It is natural to feel the desire to share what we discover, especially when a realization feels life-changing. The ego wants to be the bearer of knowledge, the one who opens others' eyes. But wisdom requires something deeper than just knowing. It requires discernment. Discernment is the ability to sense not only what to say, but when to say it, how to say it, and most importantly, to whom it should be said. Timing and readiness are everything. A truth spoken to someone who is not ready to receive it does not enlighten them. It overwhelms them, confuses them, or causes them to reject it entirely. It can even create conflict where silence would have preserved peace. On the path of self-mastery, there comes a point where the inner voice becomes stronger than the external noise. At that point, you begin to realize that speaking the truth is not always the highest act. Sometimes, keeping a truth to yourself, allowing it to shape your actions rather than your words, is the greater form of wisdom. This is especially true when the people around you are still attached to their illusions, their stories, and their version of reality. To disrupt that prematurely, even with good intentions, can do more harm than good. A seed cannot be forced to grow. It must fall on fertile soil, and even then, it must receive the right balance of light, water, and time. Similarly, the truth must be received in the right mental and emotional state. Otherwise, it is not a gift, it is a burden. When you share something powerful with someone who is not ready, their reaction will often come from fear, defensiveness, or resistance. They may mock it, argue against it, or dismiss it completely. This doesn't mean the truth is wrong, it simply means the ground was not prepared. Understanding this saves you energy. It teaches you to observe instead of forcing change. It teaches you that influence is not about pushing others to see what you see, but about living your truth so clearly and consistently that others begin to question their own patterns. That questioning must come from within them, not from your pressure. That's the difference between manipulation and inspiration. The first is control. The second is leadership. In silence, you cultivate power, the kind of power that is not dependent on anyone else's recognition. The kind of power that comes from having insight and not needing to flaunt it. It is tempting to want to explain yourself when you see others acting blindly. It is tempting to try to wake them up. But wisdom whispers, and not everyone is tuned in to hear it. There's a sacredness to inner discovery. There's a responsibility that comes with carrying insight. It's not a trophy to show off. It's a tool to navigate life with clarity, compassion, and strength. The deeper the truth, the more carefully it must be protected. Another reason truth must be kept within at times is that speaking it too soon can interrupt your own integration process. When you speak something before fully embodying it, it remains theory. It becomes a concept instead of a transformation. But when you allow the truth to work through you first in your habits, your discipline, your energy, then when and if you do speak it, your words carry a different vibration. They are not just spoken, they are felt, they resonate, they carry weight, because they are no longer just thoughts, they are lived experience. Timing also teaches you humility. It teaches you that you are not the one who decides when others awaken. You are not the hero in someone else's story. Everyone must walk their own path, face their own demons, and reach their own moment of readiness. Trying to impose your insight on someone else is often more about your ego than their growth. But trusting the process, holding space, and letting your silence speak, that's where your presence becomes transformational. You become someone who carries truth not on their tongue, but in their being. Understanding this concept changes how you interact with the world. You no longer waste energy trying to convince others. You no longer get frustrated when people don't understand. You stop speaking to be heard and start listening to understand. You become more selective with your words, more intentional with your presence, and more anchored in your path. This restraint becomes your strength. It is the quiet power of someone who knows something profound and does not need to prove it. They wait, they observe, they trust, and when the time is right, they act or speak not for validation, but because it is truly needed in that moment. There is a quiet but undeniable strength that begins to develop in a person once they learn to protect sacred knowledge. This strength is not loud, not boastful, and not attention-seeking. It is rooted deeply in self-awareness and discipline. When a person gains access to a life-changing truth, whether through experience, deep reflection, or spiritual awakening, the immediate temptation is to share it, to tell others what they've discovered, to spread what feels like light. But what many fail to understand is that not every truth is meant to be spoken aloud. Some truths are meant to transform you, not to be turned into conversation. By protecting that knowledge, by choosing to hold it within instead of announcing it, something powerful begins to unfold internally. This internal shift is subtle at first. You begin to notice that your understanding shapes your perspective on people, challenges, and even yourself. You begin to operate from a place of deeper clarity. You see patterns in behavior that others miss. You sense opportunities in silence that others overlook. Because the knowledge you carry is not meant to decorate your speech, it's meant to sharpen your vision. Every sacred truth you protect becomes part of your internal foundation. And as that foundation grows stronger, so do you. The strength that grows from within is vastly different from the kind of power people chase externally. It is not about controlling others or demanding respect. It's about knowing who you are, where you stand, and what you carry inside you. This kind of strength cannot be shaken by opinion, insult, or praise. It is built on the trust you develop with yourself. That trust is forged through silence, through restraint, through the act of holding something valuable inside without needing to release it for validation. Sacred knowledge loses its depth when it is misused. When you speak of something profound without fully living it, you reduce it to noise. You empty it of the essence it once carried. That is why ancient wisdom traditions often emphasize secrecy, not out of elitism, but out of reverence. What is sacred must be earned, protected, and embodied before it can be shared. When you begin to honor this principle, you treat knowledge like fire, powerful, dangerous, and capable of giving life or destruction, depending on how it's handled. Protecting sacred knowledge is also a form of self-respect. It means you value your journey enough not to expose its most important parts to those who may not understand or appreciate it. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself, justify your path, or convert others to your way of thinking. Instead, you allow your actions, your energy, and your growth to speak for you. That quiet self-assurance becomes magnetic. People may not always understand you, but they will feel that there is something about you that comes from depth and clarity. There is also a psychological benefit to keeping sacred knowledge private. When you speak too soon about something transformative, you run the risk of dissipating its energy. Talking can create the illusion of action, tricking the mind into believing that something is complete when it is still in its formative stages. Silence allows the insight to mature, to root itself deeper in your subconscious, and to influence your behavior from the inside out. This internalization process is what turns fleeting inspiration into lasting change. As the strength within grows, so does your patience. You become less reactive, more grounded, more capable of navigating challenges with grace. You stop needing to prove your worth or argue your truth. You know what you know, and that knowing is enough. It guides your decisions, it sharpens your intuition, and it keeps you aligned with your purpose, even when the outside world is chaotic or distracting. The more you honor the sacredness of what you've learned, the more powerful it becomes in shaping your destiny. This level of internal power also creates boundaries. You no longer tolerate shallow conversations or energy-draining interactions. You value your time, your space, and your mental clarity. You recognize that not everyone is ready for the version of you that is being shaped by sacred knowledge, and that's okay. You stop chasing connection. Instead, you attract the right people at the right time who resonate not just with your words, but with your energy. That resonance comes from your commitment to carry your truth with integrity, not for show, but for transformation over time. This way of living becomes natural. You become someone who listens more than they speak, who observes more than they react, who chooses when to reveal and when to retreat. Your silence becomes filled with presence. Your presence becomes filled with strength. And that strength becomes your signature, not because of what you say, but because of who you are becoming through the discipline of protecting what is sacred within you. The discipline of the tongue is one of the most underestimated yet most transformative forms of self-mastery. While many focus on training the body or sharpening the intellect, few truly understand the depth of strength required to govern the words that leave their mouth. Yet it is through the control of speech that the mind is truly tested and shaped. Words are not neutral. They carry weight, energy, direction. A single sentence can uplift a soul or break a spirit. A single careless phrase can sever years of trust or ignite conflict where there was once peace. Therefore, training the tongue is not merely about politeness or restraint. It is about clarity, intention, and alignment between thought and action. When the mind is undisciplined, the tongue follows suit. It speaks impulsively, reactively, without awareness. But when the mind is cultivated through silence, mindfulness, and reflection, the tongue becomes a servant of wisdom rather than a slave of emotion. This shift is profound. Instead of speaking to defend your ego, you begin to speak to serve truth. Instead of talking to fill silence, you begin to honor silence as a space of power. You become aware of the impact your words have, not only on others, but on your own inner state. Every time you speak unnecessarily or negatively, you drain your energy. Every time you speak with intention and clarity, you strengthen your inner alignment. Disciplining the tongue teaches patience. It trains you to pause before you respond, to evaluate your motivations, and to consider the consequences. That pause creates space, a gap where wisdom can intervene. In that gap, you start to notice how often speech is driven by insecurity, by the need to be right, by the compulsion to impress or dominate. But once you become aware of this pattern, you begin to change it. You choose silence over sarcasm. You choose brevity over boasting. You choose to listen instead of always being heard. And through these choices, the mind becomes still, focused, and calm. There is immense strength in restraint. The ability to hold your tongue in moments of anger, to resist the urge to gossip, to stay quiet when provoked. These are not signs of weakness, but of power. Most people are controlled by their emotions, reacting as soon as they are triggered. But those who train the tongue have trained the source, the mind. They no longer fall into traps of petty arguments or verbal retaliation. They protect their energy, their dignity, and their focus. because they know that once words are released, they cannot be taken back. And the cost of a moment's weakness can be days, weeks, or even years of regret. The discipline of the tongue is also a spiritual practice. In many traditions, speech is considered a sacred act, an expression of inner purity or pollution. To speak mindlessly is to create karmic entanglement. To speak with care is to sow seeds of clarity, peace, and truth. The words we use shape the world around us. They influence the emotions of others. They create reputations. They define relationships. When we discipline our tongue, we begin to speak blessings rather than curses, solutions rather than complaints, purpose rather than noise. This level of awareness changes how you relate to others. You begin to notice how much energy is wasted in unnecessary conversations. You see how often people talk without saying anything meaningful, and in this observation, you begin to value silence even more. You stop engaging in shallow debates. You lose interest in proving yourself. Instead, you focus on listening deeply, understanding fully, and speaking only when it serves a higher purpose. Your words become fewer but more powerful. They come from a place of depth, not impulse. And, as a result, they begin to carry weight in the eyes of others. Training the tongue also sharpens the intuition. Because you are no longer drowning in your own voice, you begin to hear the voice of the moment, the subtle signals, the emotional undercurrents, the unspoken truths in a conversation. This heightened awareness allows you to respond with precision, empathy, and impact. You are not merely reacting to words, you are responding to meaning, and that ability to hear what others cannot is the mark of inner mastery. Ultimately, the discipline of the tongue is not about suppression. It is about elevation. It is about using speech as a tool of alignment where your words reflect your truth, your values, and your vision. It is about learning to speak with integrity, to communicate with care, and to remain silent when speech would only distort what is sacred. The mind becomes still, the emotions become balanced, and the soul begins to lead. Through the control of the tongue, the entire inner world finds its order, and the outer world begins to respond with respect, peace, and clarity. When you come to understand a powerful truth, the journey does not end with discovery, it begins with responsibility. Not every truth must be spoken, not every insight must be shared. True wisdom lies not in how much you know, but in how skillfully you carry what you know. Silence is not weakness, it is strength restrained. Observation, not reaction, is the path to clarity. Sacred knowledge, when guarded, transforms you from within and deepens your presence in the world. And the discipline of the tongue becomes the mirror of a trained mind. In a world full of noise, the one who learns to hold their silence, to act with intention, and to speak with precision will always stand apart, not because they demand attention, but because their energy commands it. Let the secret shape you, not your speech. Let your growth be seen, not shouted. Let your silence speak louder than your words ever could.